wouldn't publicly play it like this. Like, come on, like I cannot.
It's not even. He might not be lying. It's fully possible.
10
they
days
just
into
were
the
waiting
game, the
for it.
war's over. Thank God.
Does watching someone stream it count?
This is a public announcement. Repeat, this is a public announcement. All people viewing Victoria 3 are now an enemy of the state. This is a federal government announcement. You will be arrested. Cease and desist immediately. You currently have the IP addresses of all users in this channel. We are rapidly approaching your location. If you do not cease and desist all Victoria 3 related activity and watch your Martin's AAR immediately.
There was this one post in the
Alright, I'll cook and
Discord.
teeth for you.
Hello everyone, welcome to a video about everyone's favourite game, Victoria 3. The way this video came about is a bit strange. As you might know, Victoria 3 is going through a lot of fixes and patches lately. They just came out with patch 1.2, which changes the game quite a bit and addresses many of the big complaints about the game. So I started off intending to make a video about that, but in order to build up to the context of patch 1.2, I started talking about the launch, I looked at the player count, and I kept finding loads of interesting things that not a lot of people know about, and before I'd even gotten to patch 1.2, my video was 20 minutes long already, with plenty more things to talk about. I believe that the topics in this video are far more interesting than just game mechanics, and they're much deeper and more important. But I will still mention patch 1.2, and I might cover it more extensively another time. I've already done a stream from the patch 1.2 beta if you want to see that on the Spud Gun Archives channel. Just to sum that up, strategic objectives are useless and add nothing to the war system basically. But criticising the war system is beating a dead horse. Everyone knows it's one of the worst systems ever put in a game. So why am I making a video about Victoria 3, especially if I don't like it that much? The first thing that haters say when they can't touch my arguments is, why are you even talking about this? Just go away and leave Victoria 3 alone. First of all, it's fun. I find the whole topic very enjoyable and amusing to talk about, and it's obviously directly relevant to my main content of Victoria 2. Furthermore, I think it's really important because I have a lot of things in this video that I don't think anyone else talks about, at least not a content creator in a video. And I believe I'm bringing forward some good insights, but I'll let you be the judge of that. One last thing I'd like to point out before I get into the video is that this is entirely separate from the Open Vic 2 project. This is my Victoria 3 personality, and I'm talking about that game in this video. You can go and see some of my content about Open Vic 2 separately, and you can join the community Discord server for that, but let's make it clear that these are separate things. I would greatly appreciate it if you gave this video a like. You can join my Discord to continue these discussions and for the banter, and you can follow me on Twitch for various live streams including Victoria 2. If you want to support this channel, which hasn't yet taken any sponsorships, you can join me on Patreon. Well, in the intro to the video, you just saw some of the fun stuff that was happening about the Victoria 3 leak, so I'll briefly mention that. The leak was a big thing for about a week or two, but I don't think it had very much impact at all. It demoralised the Victoria 3 development team for a little while, but they got back up again and got their morale back up. And they were able to say with quite some justification, at the time at least, that bugs and general issues with the game that were in the leak would be fixed. And they said giving feedback based on the leak wasn't fair because that's not what they intended to get feedback on, and they're already aware of loads of problems. I think those responses to the leak situation were fair for them to say, but you can judge for yourself whether they were proven right or wrong. The thing that's infinitely more important than that is that they also didn't listen to our feedback based on what they did show us in their dev diaries and public statements and gameplay. It took until patch 1.2 for them to do the U-turn on autonomous investment, but people were telling them that from day one.
I think I dislike this change, to be honest. It shouldn't be that difficult, especially with so many years on, 2021, to have a free market economy represented in the game. What should have been the benefit of laissez-faire in Victoria 2 is that you should have been able to build things faster. You're not building exactly what you want, but your pops are building what they perceive they need, and they should be able to do it faster than you can as a central government.
And more efficiently.
Yeah, and more efficiently. So I gotta be honest, I'm a little disappointed with this.
And I'm sure there are loads of examples on the forums, on Reddit, on the official Vic 3 Discord, which is the highly controlled environment in which the devs looked most for feedback, where many other people made this criticism of Victoria 3's original direction, but they didn't listen to that at the time, and it only took their disastrous launch, and we'll talk about the mixed reviews and player count later, for them to realise it. That damages their credibility a lot. There's one thing that's very interesting in this statement, and that's when he says, but there's a reason why we haven't yet launched Victoria 3 in open beta, early access, or similar, and then he goes on to basically say that the game wasn't in any state to do that at the time. As we all know now, they never did go on to put it in open beta or early access, because the game was unfinished, but then they just released it. Why did he mention open beta as an early access here at all, if they had absolutely no intention of doing that? They should have done that though, and doing it for patch 1.2 has been a good thing. An open beta or early access would have greatly helped Victoria 3 not be released in such a bad state, but as I'm going to prove to you in the rest of the video, they were chasing those pre-orders, and they didn't really want you to know the state the game was in until after you'd paid for it. But the point is, the leak is actually irrelevant when looking at all these problems with the game that were visible from day one. For people who actually played the leak, and I'm not one of them, they just got reinforced into their existing position. If they already wanted to buy the game, it confirmed that. If they already didn't want to buy the game, it confirmed that as well. I made that video to announce that the leak had happened, and I showed the gameplay in the video and talked about it. I completely understood and accepted the copyright strike I got for showing the leak on my video. I don't regret it for 1 second though. I didn't leak Victoria 3, surely all the blame lies squarely on that person, whoever they are, and for whatever reasons they did that, breaking whatever contract they had with Paradox in their closed beta. But since it happened, why not talk about it and tell the truth? If anything, that video must have helped Paradox to actually learn that the leak had happened. So I did them a favour, they can thank me later. The most tragic part of all of this is that my mutual advert with the Victoria 2 modding server was removed due to my coverage of the leak and the fact that people were talking about it and playing it on my Discord.
This is like George Orwell's book, 1984.
Those were very chaotic and hectic days around the leak, but it's over now, and maybe we can rebuild this bridge. They were sucking up to Paradox at the time because they had a lot of modders going to Victoria 3 to start developing their mods early, which is why we got Divergences of Darkness on like day 2. We'll see how well that aged when we get to the player count and all that. In some ways, the release of Victoria 3 was a massive success, in other ways not so much. In terms of the copies they sold and the amount of money they made, definitely a success. Just over a month after launch they claimed 500,000 copies sold, and you can do the maths in your head. They made this announcement on the 29th of November 2022, and a lot of news and articles covered it. Now here's the interesting part, they say 500k games sold since its release. No, I'm not talking about the apostrophe that shouldn't be there. By saying this, Paradox are referring to people who bought the game after it came out, between then and making this announcement. But this doesn't add up with another piece of information that we learned before this, which is that Victoria 3 became a top seller on Steam before release, therefore through pre-orders. I can't find a figure for how many pre-orders there were, but since it became a top seller and from general anecdotal evidence we know it was a lot. My question is, are Paradox including pre-orders in this figure of 500,000 that they say was after release? Is this something that companies normally do, because it seems really misleading to me, and they could easily have a slight change of wording so it doesn't say since release. If they're not including pre-orders, then why not? Don't they want to show off as many sales as possible and make themselves look more successful? For all the shareholders as well as general publicity? They didn't make any separate statements about how many pre-orders they got. None of these articles from these so-called journalists seem to pick up on this or question it. With one notable exception, these are all just quite literally copying and pasting Paradox's statement, wording it in slightly different ways, such as in the space of a month in its first 30 days post-launch, in under a month. This one's even more wrong because from the last time I checked, 25th of October to 29th of November is over 1 month. No wonder AI is going to take all these people's jobs. Grammatically speaking, none of these things could include before launch in pre-orders. I guess it falls to me, that random Victoria 2 multiplayer idiot, to ask these questions. The exception was this one from TechRaptor here, who say despite mixed reviews, the only one that seems to mention the mixed reviews, which are a huge elephant in the room. And they actually go on to make a few more very good points that represent a large chunk of the Paradox player base. As a matter of fact, this actually sums up the release very well and shows how out of touch Paradox are with the players. I'm going to go and get all my news from TechRaptor, to be honest lads. Are they open for sponsorships? The reason I mention pre-orders is because it's very key to understanding why Victoria 3 was a success. It became a success before it came out. People pre-ordered it. Victoria 3 benefited a lot from the general reputation and love for the brand Victoria. Not only people that like Victoria 2, but all the people who see Victoria 2 think it's too complicated and would like a more accessible version. And there are loads of other factors such as people's interest in this historical period and so on, including the numerous military conflicts that took place in this bloody period of human history. But Paradox massively marketed and pushed for pre-orders, including providing a pre-order bonus. Worst of all, that bonus, which was the remastered Victoria 2 soundtrack in Victoria 3, was designed to tug on the heartstrings of Victoria 2 players. By giving them something that they know and love, Victoria 3 would offer little else of that. They didn't even offer a music player on launch, that came in patch 1.2. Pushing for pre-orders this much indicates to me that Paradox were not confident in their final product on release. Well, as we all know, a Paradox game on release is nowhere near a final product. So they wanted to get as many sales as they could before the release, before people could catch on to the fact that it was a broken mess, as well as all the other issues. Of course the players did realise this, only a day or two after release when it reached mixed reviews, but Paradox had already made their millions by then, cracking open bottles of champagne and patting each other on the back. Then of course you have refunds. It's another thing that I just can't find the figures for. It's not something they're going to tell us. And this goes back to Paradox's statement and all those articles again, because even if 499,999 people refunded it, the 500k figure would still be technically true. I know quite a lot of people anecdotally who refunded it, but that doesn't really mean much. Steam only allows you to refund games if you've played them for less than 2 hours, and we know that Victoria 3 and grand strategy games in general, they lend themselves to long playthroughs, and it would take a while before you really get a grasp on the game and learn it, and are able to shit on it accurately. One of the things about Victoria 3 is that all playthroughs are basically the same, and there's barely any difference between any countries. countries. There's a well-attested lack of flavour. All you do in any country is just build buildings. 2 hours isn't enough to get through your first playthrough, let alone your second one, only to realise that it's exactly the same as the first one. This will be a massive contributor to the player count fall-off that we'll look at later, but people couldn't refund it on this basis because they didn't have long enough, and Paradox made millions. Let me tell you what I did in my own 2-hour refund window. When I got the game, I went into single player for about 20 minutes and tried to make sense of it. What's this? Alright, so, and then I played a 4-hour multiplayer game. 1 hour 40 minutes into that wasn't even scratching the surface of the game. I was figuring out really bad things right up until the end, after which obviously I couldn't refund it. Likewise for all the people I played that multiplayer game with. And the funny thing is, a lot of my 2-hour refund window was spent in the menus waiting for a rehost because of the unstable multiplayer. The next day I streamed it for another few hours, where I tried to really get into the nitty gritty of the economy, where I realised it's basically just the Hoi 4 construction queue and civ factories. I'll never get over how they just copied and pasted this fundamental section of the economy from a war game, and this is what we get after 12 years. Then of course I tried to fight a war. Are you ready for a Victoria 3 war? Are you fucking ready? The battle is up here for some reason. I didn't decide this, but it's happening there and I'm losing. He rolled a better maneuver. My general only decided to use 32 units against 67. I didn't have any input over that. It's at that point that I wish I could have refunded it after like 7 or 8 hours, but alas I couldn't. I barely played it since. That's my own personal anecdote about the refund time. Tell me in the comments, what were all your experiences within that 2-hour refund window? What did you do in Victoria 3 in that time? Do you wish you could have refunded it later as well? Let's go really in depth on the pre-orders. There is a lesson that we need to learn here. To start illustrating my point, let's go back to May 2021 when they announced Victoria 3. As you can see here on the Paradox Plaza Reddit, 5,600 upvotes for begging you not to pre-order it, just after it was announced and we knew next to nothing about the game itself yet. And their marketing machine hasn't had time to get going. Everyone has Paradox's track record of releases on their mind here, and this person is very correctly pointing out that pre-orders just encourage Paradox to release more broken and unfinished games. Now let's fast forward well over a year to August 30th 2022 when they've just announced the release date of Victoria 3, as well as opening up pre-orders and starting to publicise them. Oh, what happened? Downvoted this time. No, wait, actually it's fine. I found the thread encouraging you not to pre-order. It's got over 900 upvotes. Ah, never mind. Some sensible voices in there, but they just get drowned out in a sea of soy. Now if we go back to that thread where they talk about it becoming a top seller before release, most of the comments are positive about this, saying it's a good thing, but if we go all the way down to the bottom to our fallen comrades, a pre-order being in the top seller list is sad, not something worth praising. Do not pre-order this game, what's wrong with you? We're gonna regret it real soon, fucking hell, me I'm scared. This person tried to warn you, but no one listened to him. This is what a year of marketing does to people. Can everyone please repeat after me? I will never pre-order a Paradox game ever again. Say that 100 times, drill it into your skull. Pre-ordering is a decision that you make before the game comes out based on the information you have at that time. Before it came out, the only people who had actually ever played Victoria 3 were hand-picked by Paradox, unless you count the leak of course. All of those people are incentivized to show the game in as good a light as possible, if not actively paid to tell you to pre-order it. One thing that makes it less excusable that so many people pre-ordered this mess was Paradox's own streams of their game before release. Those were a comedy of errors, Victoria 3's developers sitting there in front of thousands of people, experiencing their own bugs.
I think I have found a menu bug. That's probably what's destroying it.
Many of which turned out to be in the game on release. Obviously it was a pretty good thing that they did those streams and they were very open and honest. These are just the developers. This was about 2 months before release and the game was in a laughable state. So laughable that the devs were laughing at it. They were probably sitting there hoping for the marketing team to work their magic. I suppose a lot of people still held out hope that the game would improve in the short amount of time between those streams and release and that they would fix the bugs, but those streams really did show how boring the game is and how terrible the war system is. I don't think I can say pre-ordering is universally always bad in every circumstance for every game by every company, but in this case with Paradox it really needs to stop, because they keep getting away with lackluster, bad, buggy releases. Something very curious that not many other people have pointed out is that Victoria 3 was pulled from the Xbox Games Pass.
What's going on?
They said it would be on the pass when they announced Victoria 3 in 2021, and they even put out a trailer on the Xbox channel which is still there, where the Xbox logo flies out at you followed by the Paradox logo, but then they very quietly removed it on the 30th of August 2022, when they announced the release date and did their first developer stream. While everyone was busy watching their stream where they publicised pre-ordering it on Steam, and didn't mention removing it from the Games Pass, they quietly mentioned that over here on a random forum post, which actually received a lot of disagreement and critical responses. That poor community ambassador they sent out here to do their dirty work while they got all the glory on their stream. This led to a lot of confusion. Even one of those articles I showed you earlier that came out on the 30th of November 2022, over a month after release, still says it's on the Xbox Game Pass. All of the discussion about this is centred around Paradox and whether they were getting enough money from Microsoft to do this, but I'm going to give you my own theory which explains how this helped Paradox sell the broken product that was Victoria 3 on release, and how it was bad for the consumer. If you were going to get the Game Pass to play Victoria 3 and you hadn't had it before, the first month is very cheap, just $1. So they were putting all their eggs in the pre-order basket on Steam, getting those full sales, rather than allowing people to play it for a cheaper amount. If it had turned out to be on the Games Pass, people would have been able to play Victoria 3 for 1 month for the equivalent of $1. They could have realised how buggy it was without paying full price. It's like a demo in a way. 1 month is more than enough time to realise how shallow the game was. Remember when I was talking about refunding? But Paradox prevented anyone from doing that. They would rather you have a 2-hour window at full price than a month-long window at $1. Of course, if the game was actually a viable product on launch, they wouldn't have had to worry about this. But that's just one theory, and to be fair, the whole Microsoft Store and downloading and playing games on that platform is terrible. It's really bad. I wouldn't recommend getting any games on it unless there's a situation where you can save as much money as you potentially could have there. In the same statement where Paradox announced their dubious 500,000 figure, they also announced that they were nominated for the Best Strategy Game of 2022. Congratulations on being nominated. What a great achievement it was to be a strategy game that happened to be released in the year of our Lord 2022 AD. There weren't very many others. Of course Victoria 3 lost, but a small part of me was hoping that it would win for the pure clown world material. People were making fun of the fact that it lost to some Mario game, but I think that's a bit harsh on the Mario game, which looks very good in its own genre, which is quite different from Victoria 3. I mean, it's more of an XCOM style game. This whole award was very silly anyway. These games are all very different despite being under the general umbrella of strategy and simulation. Was there not a forklift simulator or farm simulator released in 2022? Those will be better than Victoria 3. Maybe Victoria 3 would have won if it entered as more of a filing cabinet simulator than strategy game. A pretty good strategy game, Knights of Honor 2, was released on the 6th of December 2022, but it didn't count because it was too late to be nominated. These awards were held on the 8th of December. I don't see anything wrong with holding these awards in January 2023 so you can catch everything in 2022. So I've already mentioned how the reviews on Steam got to mixed. They went down to 63% and stayed at 63% for a long time, maybe a couple of months. Dropping to mixed reviews completely vindicated everything we'd been saying, but it also shows when the actual players got their hands on it, they felt very differently from all those reviewers and the people that Paradox paid to shill it. And everyone who pre-ordered it started to look very silly, and things turned on the Paradox forum and on Reddit. People were actually criticising the game and not getting downvoted into nothing. I said this towards the end of the War System video, but the absolute best thing about all these people is that they would turn on Paradox in the blink of an eye if Paradox did something they didn't like. We saw it with Imperator Rome, and we see it with every DLC that doesn't go down well. And if Victoria 3 doesn't go down well, which I cannot predict at this point, well, that could get ugly as well. Now obviously I don't have to go and grab too many examples from the Paradox forums and Reddit to show how there was a massive switch when the game actually came out. From the discourse being overwhelmingly positive about the game and shutting down any negative opinion, to it becoming balanced and negative opinions actually being able to come to the forefront. When it came to the Steam reviews, there was a lot of coping, especially these completely unsubstantiated claims of review bombing. I've never seen a single shred of evidence for this. The people who really hate Victoria 3, such as many people in the Vic 2 community, just didn't buy the game, therefore can't review it. It's just an easy accusation to throw out when the reviews aren't going your way. People also said a lot of the negative reviews didn't have enough playtime to justify their review. Even Isoro Productions said that in the intro to his video, which was a negative video about Victoria 3 where he gave it a 6 out of 10, and showed integrity by rejecting the sponsorship for it. The thing is, this was a non-argument because there were also loads of positive reviews which also had minimal playtime. There was no correlation here. There are positive and negative reviews with varying levels of detail and varying levels of playtime. Also, a lot of the positive reviews came with some very big caveats. And some of them I read, I was surprised they were actually a positive review. They completely dismantled the game and then recommended it. But the thing is, if you don't like the game and you want to leave a negative review for it, why would you play it anymore? If you don't like the game, you're done with it, and you might even refund it if you've played it less than 2 hours, and become part of Victoria 3's massive player count drop-off that we'll talk about later. If you're a food critic and you take one bite, decide it's disgusting and never eat the rest of it, even though the person who cooked it for you said it would be delicious, does that not count as a valid opinion? And furthermore, the cook also advertised this food as pizza too. So anyway, the release happened and then a little while after that the player count absolutely plummeted. But every game does that, and the numbers you see here are completely meaningless alone. For that reason, this section is all about the comparisons with other games, how many players they had on launch and how many players they retained in the following months, and all the talking points that those comparisons raise. Looking at the player count is obviously extremely important, and I can guarantee that Paradox have been paying very close attention as well. They may have got their 500,000 sales, but the players that they retain after that are more likely to buy their DLC. And of course it just shows the general state of the game. Are people losing interest in it? Is it replayable? Do the numbers support all these people that say the game is lacking flavour and replayability? Even if the vanilla game is lacking, are mods keeping people interested? As of when I'm making this video, we've got patch 1.2 and a 20% sale, but we won't be able to see the effect of that until later, until we can look back on the data in retrospect, as we can with the launch and the months after that. So it would be extremely foolish to make any conclusions about patch 1.2 until later.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Paradox released this graph in a forum post while I was making this video. It was actually really annoying after spending hours agonising over these details and stats that I'm working with, meticulously making sure that I get everything right so that I can present a fair and balanced video, only for Paradox to release the biggest example of lies, damned lies and statistics you've ever seen. Now this graph is wildly misleading for a number of reasons. First of all, the reason I just gave you, which is that we are right in the middle of the effects of patch 1.2. They're showing the player count effect on it prematurely. It's obvious that patch 1.2 will raise the player count because it did improve the game, but we don't know yet how well that will be retained. Secondly, you're probably wondering why this graph says numbers in the tens of thousands, while the Steam charts that I gave you earlier say about 9,000 or something. That's because Paradox are using a different figure here. They're using the amount of unique players who launch Victoria 3 in a given day, whereas Steam charts and other Steam sources base their statistics on the amount of players playing the game at the same time, on an hourly basis. This is so confusing, but the advantage of the concurrent players measurement is that it actually takes into account the amount of time that players are playing it in any given session. On the figures that Paradox give, if you launch Victoria 3 for any amount of time, you're counted. For example, in the making of this video, I launched Victoria 3 for well under a minute in order to quickly grab a screenshot to make a meme. I didn't actually play the game, but I'm counted in these numbers. I'm on there somewhere. Another issue with this graph is that the X and Y axes are not marked. I remember being told to always do that at school. As you can see, the Steam charts graph is marked with the dates and the numbers, and it doesn't change the font size or the colour of a number to try and make it look flashier and bigger than it actually is, which is frankly a clear sign of propaganda and misleading graphs. But at the end of the day, these two different methods are measuring the same thing, and if you place them over each other, the trends are the same. Obviously it goes up for the weekend and down for the weekdays, but there are way more unique players than concurrent players at patch 1.2, which means that these 14,000 extra players are playing it for less time. Paradox's graph is more useful for finding people who are just checking out the patch, regardless of how long they play it, whereas the Steam charts graph is more useful for finding long playthroughs, people actually playing the game, doing a campaign. If you played Victoria 3 for an hour or more, then you're on the Steam charts graph. The last reason, and by far the most important reason that these figures are misleading, is because they have absolutely no context or comparison. These stats are cherry-picked by Paradox to make themselves look good. They absolutely have the right to do that, but I have the right to point out how it's misleading. It completely fails to mention the elephant in the room, which are the launch stats, which would be to the left on this graph. To illustrate how easy it is to use stats to mislead you, let's look at Paradox's share price graph. This graph shows an entire year. The full context is that they've actually gone up a lot over this year, but if I cherry-pick part of this graph to suit my agenda, and zoom in on this section down here, look, they've absolutely crashed. It's over. Get out while you still can, Tencent. I don't have access to the data that Paradox used to provide this graph. When I asked on this forum thread what they mean by our data, because they didn't provide any source in the post, he said it's collected directly from Steam. So I don't have any reason to distrust the numbers they're actually giving us for the daily active player count. It's just that I can't go and get these numbers myself to show the rest of the context or make comparisons. If there is some way, then I don't know what it is. Steam and Paradox are business partners, they can share data. I'm just a random YouTuber asking questions. One source to go on to get their daily active player count on launch would be their sales figure of 500,000. If we assume all 500k people were playing it, and all you can do is make assumptions when they don't provide the actual data, then it dropped from 500,000 to 44,000 in the first few months, or as a percentage, about 90% of the players. Oh, I can see why Paradox didn't include this now. This makes that increase to 58,000 that Paradox put in larger gold writing much more insignificant. Now let's move on to my comparisons using the Steam chart's concurrent players data. What I'm going to do first is compare the launch of the games and the subsequent months after that to show the player drop off in real numbers and percentages. As you can see, in the first month it went down by 57%, then 50%, 30%, 25%. So first of all, let's look at Crusader Kings 3, a very good comparison. This was the most recent Paradox release before Vic 3. And as you can see, the average concurrent player count is very comparable on launch, although CK3 has a bigger peak count. The drop off in the first month after release is actually quite similar, but then it gets much worse for Victoria 3. It loses half of its players going into December, whereas CK3 only loses 36% in the equivalent time. And then in the 4th month after release, CK3 is sitting on 12,000 players, whereas Vic3 is sitting on 5,000, after coming from the same average players on launch. If we put these two games together side by side in real time, this is about 2 years after CK3's launch. Victoria 3's player count dropped below CK3's player count on the 28th of November, 1 month after Victoria 3's launch. This is very funny. They would make their 500k sales announcement the next day. CK3 wasn't even that DLC'd up yet, it had one expansion by this point, and it's widely considered to be quite flavourless and lacking a lot of content. I'm going to pay attention to this battle in the future. Let's see if Victoria 3 ever surpasses CK3 again. And I don't think it will, because just when Victoria 3 is getting patch 1.2, CK3 has a new DLC coming out. Now let's do the real comparison, Imperator Rome. I had to use a different website because Steam charts didn't give an accurate reading for the first month here. Well, it turns out that Victoria 3 actually beats Imperator Rome. What, you thought I would only show games that perform better than Victoria 3? Their player counts never met in real time either. This shows that Victoria 3's situation is nowhere near as bad as Imperator Rome. A lot of people question whether Paradox would abandon Victoria 3 in the same way as they did Imperator. I personally never thought they would abandon Victoria 3 anyway, but the data shows that it's unlikely to happen as well. Victoria 3's first expansion is actually the most important thing to look out for. If that flops, then Victoria 3 is under serious risk of being abandoned, but there's no reason to suppose that it will or won't at this point until we know about it. Now on to the next game. Do you think you can guess what this one is? I'll give you a few seconds. If you want more time, just pause the video. It's Hoi 4. Not only does it do better percentage wise, on its 4th month after release it actually beats Victoria 3 in terms of real player count, after starting from a considerably lower base. This could also point towards Paradox's new casual audience that they're going for not being quite as loyal. But as you probably know, Hearts of Iron 4 went on to have a very bright future, as you can see here. Over 6 years of war gameplay, it built itself up to be on the same level as Vic 3 when it came out. Now let's zoom in on when the two games actually meet, using a better source that shows them properly. An expansion came out for Hoi 4 at the end of September here. The peak that Hoi 4 achieved with that DLC is higher than what Victoria 3 had on its launch. And then around the 8th of November, exactly 2 weeks after Vic 3 came out, it officially dropped below Hoi 4's player count, and then the gap just widened after that. Remember all the haters that said if you want a war game, go and play Hoi 4? Well, this was the day that the community listened to them, and that happened. Well, I didn't do that. One of the reasons that Hoi 4 has been so successful is because of the content creators that have been making excellent content out of it for all these years. Those same content creators did some stuff about Vic 3 when it came out, and then one by one they dropped off and went back to Hoi 4. Whether they were sponsored to do Vic 3 or not, the game couldn't retain them on its own actual merits, with Isora Productions, who is the biggest Paradox content creator, calling it stinky and going first. But for all those Hoi 4 people, you could say, oh well, they play a war game, Victoria 3 is not for them. Maybe that's true, and Victoria 3 will build its own content creators that are based around it. I've seen maybe 1 or 2 channels becoming that. I just can't help but think that it's pretty obvious that Victoria 3 is severely lacking, boring, doesn't lend itself well to very interesting or varied content. This game just doesn't provide stories, and people love a good story. They added characters, they added leaders, they added 3D models, and that has done nothing to actually provide any stories based around them. I'm not saying that people haven't made good content out of it, but just compare it to Crusader Kings 3, which has developed a massive amount of great content creators, consistently putting new stuff out for that, including CK2 creators that moved to it. Look how Victoria 3 appealed to the main Victoria 2 content creators, am I right? Anyway, just like the actual performance of the game itself, this could easily change in the future if things improve, and I'll be paying close attention to that whenever they finally get round to releasing their first expansion that the Grand Edition people are waiting for. There will definitely be sponsorships for that, but we'll see if the big Paradox content creators actually stick around and make good content out of it based on the game's own merits, replayability, but actually do it consistently instead of just being paid to do it and then leaving. Also, we have to realise that Paradox dumped so much money into the marketing of Vic 3 and all those sponsorships. Can they do that again for the next expansion? How many people can they actually get? If they put in as much money again as they did in the launch, does it become a sunk cost fallacy? The performance of Vic 3 on launch puts way more pressure on this expansion. It simply has to be good. And it's going to be $30. And I just hope that the experience of Victoria 3's launch will mean that the consumers don't fall for the marketing and pre-order it, and they actually base their decision on real reviews and the merits of the expansion. When people say that I'm just a blind hater, they don't understand that the behaviour I'm encouraging would force Paradox to make better products. Anyway, another reason for Hoi 4's success is of course multiplayer. It may only be a fraction of the player count, but it punches well above its weight in its importance. Replayability, innovation in how you actually play the game, modding, content, competitive tournaments, multiplayer is so important, and I think I've heard that the Hoi 4 devs actually cater towards multiplayer, but Hoi 4 players will have to tell me more about that. Multiplayer in Victoria 3 is atrocious because of non-existent war and just all the other problems of the game being boring, and then the multiplayer system itself is just an absolute joke, no in-game chat, unstable. They are working on fixing that instability. Unlike Victoria 2, when Victoria 3 goes out of sync, it actually points to which file caused the out of sync. So Paradox are looking at those desynchronization causes and fixing them one by one. So all credit to them for doing that. They would have found these earlier if they tested multiplayer before releasing it, but at least we're getting there eventually. Anyway, tangent over, let's go back to some comparisons. EU4 and Stellaris both have a very similar player count, and Victoria 3 fell below them both at around the same time. Now let's compare them on launch. First of all, EU4 performs remarkably better than Victoria 3 did on launch, and this is 10 years ago in 2013, when Paradox was a considerably smaller company with a smaller audience. Obviously there are a lot of factors as to why this comparison is unfair. I investigated why EU4 had such a big increase in player count that quickly, and it was because apparently it went on 50% sale in November. I feel cheated because I bought it for full price, but I haven't bought a single DLC for it since, so I guess that evens out. Now we're actually coming to what could be the most interesting comparison, and I had no idea about this until I started making this video and researching it. And that's Stellaris. The numbers you see here are actually very close and comparable, because their peak player count on launch and then the first month drop off is more or less the same. Victoria 3's percentage drop off of average players is of course worse, but the reason the Stellaris comparison is interesting is because of Stellaris' comeback. Victoria 3 didn't perform the same on launch as Imperator Rome, it performed the same on launch as Stellaris, very roughly speaking, and it's perfectly possible that Victoria 3 is at the beginning of the same graph as Stellaris here, and coming from a supposed blind hater of Victoria 3, these facts are very good for Victoria 3. I went where the facts led me, I didn't mislead anyone. Paradox should have just put this graph on their forum instead to show how Victoria 3 could rise again. I've heard a lot of good things about how Stellaris fixed a lot of its problems after launch, had a lot of good free updates and so on. I don't know that too well myself, I've only played it a little bit. This does of course lead me to exactly the same point I made earlier, which is that Victoria 3's future comes down to its first expansion. That's make or break for it. No pressure. Vic 3 and Stellaris have a lot of things in common. One of them is that they were both a completely new direction for a Paradox game. And the thing that explains most of the reason I'm pissed off at Victoria 3 and not Stellaris is because Victoria 3 claims to be a sequel to Victoria 2, whereas Stellaris is just a new franchise. Vic 3 of course did a few things which were just objectively terrible, like the war system, and I can't think of anything that Stellaris did that was that bad on launch. Victoria 2 and its generation of Paradox games are unfortunately and wrongly very easy to pirate, and there might actually be people still playing it out there on a physical copy. That's the reason this is an inaccurate comparison, let alone the reasons this is an unfair comparison. It's an old janky game, alright? And we cannot compare the launch because Steam Charts began its data in 2012. We do have this though, and I'll never stop posting it. And if we compare it to a fellow nominee of the 2022 Strategy Game Award, it actually looks like Warhammer 3 really dropped off hard as well. It fell below 10k players as well from a higher point than Victoria 3, but they turned it around with some DLC or something. Could that mean that Victoria 3 has some hope, or was Warhammer a better base to build DLC out of? I don't know enough about Warhammer 3 to compare the actual games, so I'll leave that to others. So what game do you think we should do next? Now this comparison might seem funny, but again it's really unfair because Farming Simulator is a genuinely loved and successful franchise that's clearly very good at what it does. People prefer the seemingly repetitive tasks of farming over the repetitive tasks in Victoria 3 of just building buildings and upgrading filing cabinets. Maybe this comparison actually shows the difference between monotonous but satisfying work and unsatisfying busy work, and definitely a game with soul versus a game with no soul. Well, I think the Farming Simulator comparison about does it. Let's call it here. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this video interesting. If you want more, then give the video a like and subscribe if you haven't. Remember never to pre-order a Paradox game ever again, or a DLC, and definitely not Victoria 3's upcoming DLC. And remember, if you play multiplayer and the host has the DLC, you can play it without buying it yourself. So try and arrange that to test out the DLC before making your own decision. This video ended up being a lot more time consuming than I thought, especially when Paradox dropped their fake news graph, and I had to respond to it. I got a ridiculous amount of hate on the forum thread just for questioning it. These people are completely deranged. I dropped this image and left, and someone later told me I got banned for this. Anyway, if you want to support the channel so I can keep telling the truth, then you can join my Patreon, and you get some nice extra perks for doing so. Also come and watch my streams live on Twitch. I might do some Victoria 3 again to check out the patch a bit more, or I might not. In any case, have a very nice day, goodbye.